They told me I didn't belong. Standing there in my best dress from Target, clutching an invitation that had my brother's name embossed in gold, while three men in polo shirts and khakis looked at me like I'd tracked mud across their pristine marble floors. They said the guest list was full, that there must have been some mistake, that perhaps I'd be more comfortable at the public course down the road. But what they didn't know was that the quiet woman behind the pro shop counter had been watching the whole exchange, and when she finally spoke, her words would turn their exclusive little world upside down. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The invitation had arrived on a Tuesday, mixed in with the usual stack of bills and grocery store circulars that filled my mailbox. At first, I thought it was a mistake. The heavy cardstock, the elegant script, the Prestwick Country Club logo embossed in forest green and gold. You are cordially invited to attend the annual members tournament and charity gala in honor of Marcus Rivera. My brother's name, printed there like he belonged in that world of manicured greens and champagne brunches. I held the invitation up to the kitchen light, reading it 3 times before the reality sank in. Marcus had made it. After years of grinding 16-hour days at his accounting firm, after missing family dinners and holidays and birthdays, after wearing the same 2 suits to work for 3 years straight because every spare dollar went into his savings account, he'd finally earned enough to join Prestwick, the most prestigious country club in Millbrook, where memberships started at $50,000 and the waiting list stretched longer than a decade. Marcus had been talking about Prestwick since we were kids, back when our dad worked maintenance at the public golf course on the south side of town. Dad would come home with stories about the fancy private clubs, about members who spent more on a single round of golf than our family spent on groceries in a month. Marcus would listen with wide eyes, asking questions about the clubhouses and the tournaments and the networking opportunities that seemed to exist in a completely different universe from our cramped 2-bedroom apartment above Mrs. Chen's bakery. "Someday, Rosa," he'd tell me when we were teenagers, sharing a bag of day-old donuts Mrs. Chen would leave by our door, "someday I'm going to be one of those guys. I'm going to play golf at a real club, wear the right clothes, know the right people, and when I do, I'm taking you with me." I'd always laughed at the fantasy, but Marcus never stopped believing in it. He studied harder than anyone I knew, earned a full scholarship to state school, graduated summa cum laude with his accounting degree, and landed a job at Henderson & Associates before he was 23. While I bounced between retail jobs and community college classes, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, Marcus climbed the corporate ladder with single-minded determination. The phone rang as I stood in my kitchen, still staring at the invitation. "Rosa, did you get it?" Marcus's voice was electric with excitement. "I'm looking at it right now," I said, running my finger along the embossed border. "Marcus, this is incredible. Prestwick Country Club? How did you—" "Partner track," he interrupted, and I could hear the grin in his voice. "Henderson called me into his office yesterday and told me I'm being considered for junior partner, the youngest in the firm's history. They want me to start networking with the right people, building relationships with potential clients. Prestwick is where it happens, Rosa. This is it. This is everything we talked about." I sank into one of my mismatched kitchen chairs, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what this meant for him. Marcus had sacrificed so much for this moment. While his college friends were partying and dating and figuring themselves out, he'd been studying. While his coworkers went out for drinks after work, he'd been putting in overtime. While I'd been struggling through my 20s, changing majors and changing jobs and changing apartments, Marcus had never wavered from his goal. "The tournament is this Saturday," he continued. "Black tie dinner afterward, charity auction, the whole thing. I want you there, Rosa. I need you there. You're the only family I have left, and I can't celebrate this without you." Family. The word hit me harder than it should have. After our parents died in the car accident 3 years ago, it had been just the 2 of us. Marcus dealing with his grief by throwing himself even deeper into work. Me dealing with mine by floating aimlessly through a series of dead-end jobs and failed relationships. We'd grown apart in our grief, ships passing in the night. But the love was still there. The loyalty was still there. And now, finally, Marcus was achieving the dream he'd carried since childhood. "Of course I'll be there," I told him, though even as I said the words, anxiety was building in my chest. What do I need to know? What should I wear? How do I— Just be yourself," Marcus said, and there was something in his voice that made me think he was nervous too. "Wear something nice, but not too flashy. These people can smell desperation from a mile away. Just be confident, like you belong there. Be confident, like I belonged at Prestwick Country Club, where the membership dues probably cost more than I made in 6 months at my job, managing the customer service desk at Williams Electronics, where people had names like Worthington and Vanderbilt and spoke casually about their vacation homes in the Hamptons, where the women wore jewelry that cost more than my car and the men discussed business deals over 18-year-old scotch. But this was Marcus's moment, Marcus's dream. And if he needed me there, I would figure out how to belong, even if it was just for one night. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October weather that made everything look like a postcard. I'd spent the entire week preparing, which mostly involved standing in department store dressing rooms, trying on dresses I couldn't afford, and practicing walking in heels that made my feet ache after 10 minutes. I'd finally settled on a simple black dress from Target that looked expensive if you didn't look too closely at the seams, paired with my grandmother's pearl necklace and the black pumps I'd worn to job interviews. I'd watched YouTube tutorials on country club etiquette, Googled the names of Prestwick's most prominent members, and practiced small talk in my bathroom mirror until I felt like I was preparing for a performance rather than attending a family celebration. Which, in a way, I suppose I was. The drive to Prestwick took 45 minutes through increasingly affluent neighborhoods, past manicured lawns and circular driveways, and houses that looked like they belonged in magazines. My Honda Civic felt increasingly shabby with each mile, and by the time I reached the club's wrought iron gates, my palms were sweating despite the cool autumn air. Prestwick Country Club sat on 300 acres of rolling hills overlooking Millbrook Lake, all Georgian brick and white columns, and perfectly maintained landscaping. The parking lot was filled with BMWs and Mercedes and Lexuses, their paint jobs gleaming in the afternoon sun. I found a spot between a Porsche and a Tesla, checked my lipstick in the rearview mirror one more time, and walked toward the clubhouse with what I hoped looked like confidence. The main entrance opened into a marble foyer that belonged in a museum. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, oil paintings of stern-faced men in golf attire lined the walls, and everything smelled like leather and old money and fresh flowers. A small group of people clustered near the registration table, their voices carrying the easy confidence of people who'd never questioned their right to be in spaces like this. I approached the table where 3 men stood with clipboards and tablets, all wearing matching polo shirts with the Prestwick logo. The one in the middle, a thin man with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, looked up as I approached. "Good afternoon," I said, trying to channel the poise I'd practiced in my mirror. "I'm Rosa Rivera. I'm here for the members' tournament." The man glanced at his tablet, then back at me, his expression shifting almost imperceptibly. "Rivera," he repeated, making a show of scrolling through his list. "I'm not seeing a Rosa Rivera on our guest list." "I'm Marcus Rivera's sister," I explained, pulling the invitation from my purse. "He's a new member. This came addressed to our family." The 3 men exchanged glances that I pretended not to notice. The one with the tablet, whose name tag read, "Bradley Morrison, Membership Director," took the invitation and examined it like he was looking for signs of forgery. "I see," he said finally. "Well, Marcus Rivera is indeed on our member list, but this appears to be a family invitation. We typically expect immediate family members to be added to the guest list in advance." "I'm his sister," I repeated, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. "His immediate family." "Of course," Bradley said, his smile as thin as paper. "But you understand, we have very specific protocols for our events. Security concerns, catering numbers, that sort of thing, without advance notice. Is there a problem here?" The second man stepped forward, his name tag identifying him as Richard Clemens, events coordinator. He was younger than Bradley, with the kind of artificially white teeth that came from expensive dental work, and the confidence that came from never having his right to exist in a space questioned. "Ms. Rivera here seems to be under the impression that she's invited to today's tournament," Bradley explained, handing over my invitation like it was evidence in a criminal trial. Richard examined the invitation with exaggerated thoroughness. "I see the confusion," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. This is what we call a courtesy invitation. It's sent to new members' households as a welcome gesture, but actual attendance requires separate RSVP and guest list approval. Very standard procedure. Marcus told me to come, I said, hating how defensive I sounded. He specifically invited me. He's expecting me. And I'm sure he is, said the third man, whose name tag read James Whitfield, club president. He was older than the other two, with silver hair and the kind of deep tan that came from decades of leisure time. But you have to understand, Ms. Rivera, today's tournament is a very exclusive event. Our members expect a certain level of consistency in their club experience. The word consistency hung in the air between us, loaded with meaning I wasn't supposed to acknowledge. I looked around the foyer, taking in the sea of white faces, the designer clothes, the easy comfort of people who'd never had to prove they belonged anywhere. And suddenly I understood what was happening. I'm dressed appropriately, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I have an invitation. My brother is a member. What exactly is the problem? Bradley's smile became even thinner. There's no problem, per se, but our guest list is quite full today, and we simply don't have the space to accommodate walk-in guests, even with invitations. Perhaps you could arrange to meet your brother after the tournament. I'm sure he'd understand the situation. The situation, I repeated. Club policy, Richard added helpfully. Very strict about our capacity limits. Fire marshal regulations, you understand. I looked past them into the main dining room, where I could see at least a dozen empty tables set with gleaming china and crystal. It looks like you have plenty of space. Reserve seating, James said firmly. All accounted for, I'm afraid. The three of them stood there like sentries, their message clear even if they were too polite to say it directly. I didn't belong here. Whatever Marcus had achieved, whatever he'd earned, whatever membership he'd purchased, it didn't extend to his sister, with her Target dress and her Honda Civic, and her obvious lack of pedigree. I was about to turn around, to walk back to my car and call Marcus with preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Some excuse about not feeling well when I heard a voice from behind the registration table. Excuse me, gentlemen. The voice belonged to a woman I hadn't noticed before, someone who'd been working quietly behind the scenes while the three men handled the front-facing duties. She was probably in her 50s, with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and wearing a simple navy blazer over khakis. Her name tag read, Patricia Hendricks, Pro Shop Manager. Patricia, Bradley said, his tone slightly annoyed at the interruption. We're handling this. I can see that, Patricia said, stepping around the table to get a better look at me. There was something in her eyes, a sharpness that hadn't been there when she was arranging papers and checking lists. Ms. Rivera, did you say? Yes, I replied, not sure where this was going. Patricia studied me for a long moment, and I had the unsettling feeling that she was seeing something the three men had missed. Her gaze lingered on my grandmother's pearl necklace, then moved to my face, taking in features that I'd inherited from my father's side of the family. Rivera? She repeated thoughtfully. That's an interesting name. Tell me, did your father ever work in golf course maintenance? The question caught me completely off guard. Yes, I said slowly. He worked at Brookside Municipal for 20 years. How did you? Carlos Rivera, Patricia said, and it wasn't a question. Crew chief at Brookside. Retired about 5 years ago before he... She stopped herself, but I could see in her eyes that she knew about the accident. You knew my father? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Patricia's expression softened. I knew your father very well. We worked together for 3 years when I was starting out in golf course management. Before I came to Prestwick, I was assistant groundskeeper at Brookside. Carlos Rivera was the best mentor I ever had. Taught me everything I know about course maintenance, about leadership, about treating people with respect regardless of their position. The three men were looking increasingly uncomfortable with this turn in the conversation. Bradley cleared his throat pointedly. Patricia, I'm sure this is all very touching, but we do have procedures. We have procedures, Patricia agreed, her voice taking on an edge I hadn't heard before. And one of those procedures is treating our members' families with courtesy and respect. Which we've done, Richard protested. We've explained the situation very clearly. The situation, Patricia interrupted, is that you're standing here trying to turn away the daughter of one of the finest men I ever had the privilege to work with. Carlos Rivera put in 18-hour days to keep Brookside's greens in tournament condition. He worked holidays and weekends and never complained once. He mentored young staff members like me when he could have just focused on his own job. And when the city tried to lay off half the maintenance crew during budget cuts, he fought for every single one of their jobs. The foyer had gone quiet. A few other guests had stopped their conversations to listen, sensing drama in the air. I could feel my cheeks burning, partly from embarrassment at being the center of attention, but partly from something else. Pride, maybe. Or vindication. "That's all well and good," James said stiffly, "but club policy." "Club policy," Patricia said, her voice rising slightly, "is that members' immediate family are welcome at member events with proper invitation, which Ms. Rivera clearly has." She held up my invitation, the same piece of cardstock that Bradley had examined like it might be counterfeit. "This is a legitimate invitation to Marcus Rivera's family. Rosa Rivera is Marcus Rivera's sister. She's dressed appropriately, she's been polite and respectful, and the only reason you're giving her trouble is because she doesn't look like your usual crowd." "Now see here," Bradley began. "No," Patricia said firmly. "You see here, I've been working at this club for 15 years. I've seen members bring guests who showed up drunk, guests who caused scenes, guests who violated every standard of behavior we claim to uphold. But you want to turn away Carlos Rivera's daughter because she doesn't drive the right car or wear the right designer label." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel eyes on me from every corner of the foyer, members and staff alike watching this confrontation unfold. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Patricia stepped closer to the three men, her voice dropping to a level that somehow made her words more powerful, not less. "Carlos Rivera worked his entire life so his children could have opportunities he never had. His son earned membership to this club through years of hard work and sacrifice. His daughter has every right to be here to celebrate that achievement. And if you can't see that, if you're so blinded by your own prejudices that you dishonor the memory of a man who spent his life making golf courses beautiful for people like you to enjoy, then you're not the men I thought you were." She turned to me, her expression gentle again. "Ms. Rivera, welcome to Prestwick Country Club. Your father would be so proud to see you here today." And then, in a moment that would replay in my mind for years to come, Patricia Hendricks stepped back and said the words that changed everything. "Colonel Thompson, welcome back." I stared at her, confusion written across my face. "I'm sorry, I think there's been a mistake. I'm Rosa Rivera, not—" Patricia smiled, a real smile this time, warm and knowing. "No mistake, dear. Your father told me all about you during those long days we worked together. About his brilliant daughter who was studying military history at community college. About how proud he was when you enlisted in the National Guard. About Lieutenant Rosa Rivera, who served 2 deployments in Afghanistan and came home with commendations for valor under fire." The foyer went dead silent. Every conversation stopped, every head turned. "Your father bragged about you constantly," Patricia continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "About how you earned your commission in the field. About how you led supply convoys through hostile territory. About how you saved the lives of 3 soldiers when your convoy hit an IED outside Kandahar. About how you came home as Colonel Rosa Rivera, one of the youngest women ever to achieve that rank in the National Guard." I felt the blood drain from my face. My father had told her. He'd told her everything, all the things I never talked about, all the parts of my life I'd tried to leave behind when I came home and struggled to readjust to civilian life. All the sleepless nights and panic attacks and therapy sessions I'd hidden from Marcus because I didn't want him to worry, didn't want to burden him with my problems when he was working so hard to build his career. Patricia looked directly at Bradley, Richard, and James, her voice steady and clear. "So let me ask you gentlemen one more time. Do you really want to explain to the members of this club why you denied entry to a decorated war veteran? Do you want to tell them why you thought Colonel Rosa Rivera, daughter of Carlos Rivera, sister of member Marcus Rivera, didn't belong at their exclusive little tournament?" The 3 men stood frozen, their earlier confidence evaporating like morning dew. The entire foyer was watching now. Members who'd been heading to their tables, stopping to see how this would play out. And in that moment, I realized that everything was about to change. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. I could feel every pair of eyes in the foyer locked on me, processing Patricia's words, recalibrating their assumptions about the woman in the target dress who'd been standing there just moments before. The weight of their attention was crushing, but it was nothing compared to the weight of my past suddenly being dragged into the light. Bradley Morrison's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Richard Clemens had gone pale beneath his artificial tan. James Whitfield looked like he was calculating the political ramifications of the scene unfolding in his clubhouse foyer. These were men accustomed to controlling narratives, to managing perceptions, to ensuring that everything at Prestwick ran according to their carefully orchestrated vision of propriety and exclusivity. "I think there's been some confusion," Bradley finally managed, his voice notably less authoritative than it had been minutes earlier. "We weren't aware that Ms. Rivera had a military background." "Colonel Rivera," Patricia corrected sharply. "And whether you were aware or not is irrelevant. You made a judgment about this woman based on nothing more than your own biases. You looked at her and decided she didn't belong here before you even knew who she was." I wanted to disappear. Every instinct I'd developed over years of trying to blend into civilian life, of avoiding conversations about my service, of deflecting questions about the gap in my resume was screaming at me to find the nearest exit. But my feet felt welded to the marble floor, and Patricia's hand had somehow found its way to my elbow, a gentle but firm pressure that seemed to say, "Stay put." "Perhaps we could discuss this privately," James suggested, glancing nervously at the growing crowd of onlookers. Several members had abandoned their conversations entirely and were drifting closer, their curiosity overriding any pretense of polite disinterest. "Privately?" Patricia's laugh was sharp and humorless. "You had no problem humiliating Colonel Rivera publicly. You were perfectly comfortable making a scene when you thought she was just some woman who'd wandered in off the street. But now that you know who she really is, suddenly you want privacy?" An elderly man in a navy blazer approached our group, his expression troubled. His name tag identified him as William Ashford, board member. I recognized the name from my week of research. Old Millbrook family, textile fortune, one of Prestwick's founding members. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "Is there a problem here?" "No problem at all, Mr. Ashford," Bradley said quickly, his practiced smile snapping back into place. "Just a small misunderstanding about guest protocols. We're sorting it out." William Ashford looked from Bradley to me, taking in my obvious discomfort and Patricia's protective stance. "Miss, are you all right?" Before I could answer, Patricia stepped forward. "Mr. Ashford, I'd like you to meet Colonel Rosa Rivera, daughter of Carlos Rivera, who used to maintain the greens at Brookside." Colonel Rivera served 2 tours in Afghanistan and earned multiple commendations for valor. She's here today as the guest of her brother Marcus, our newest member. Something shifted in William Ashford's expression. "Carlos Rivera," he repeated slowly. "Wasn't he the groundskeeper who helped design the water management system that saved Brookside during the drought of 2018? "The very same," Patricia confirmed. "Carlos consulted on that project during his retirement, refused payment, said he just wanted to help keep the course alive for the next generation of golfers." William turned to face Bradley, Richard, and James, and I could see decades of quiet authority in his bearing. "Gentlemen, would you care to explain why you've kept one of our members' distinguished guests waiting in the foyer?" "There was a question about the guest list," Richard began. "What question?" William's voice was deceptively mild. "The young lady has an invitation. She's appropriately dressed. Her brother is a member in good standing. What possible question could there be?" The 3 men exchanged glances, trapped between their earlier position and the growing scrutiny from one of the club's most respected board members. I could see them searching for a way to save face, to reframe their obstruction as something other than what it clearly was. "The invitation process requires advance notice." Bradley tried again, but his voice lacked conviction. "Since when?" The question came from a woman who'd been standing near the registration table with her husband. She was probably in her 60s, with silver hair and the kind of understated elegance that came from genuine confidence rather than designer labels. We've brought guests with family invitations dozens of times over the years. When did that change? More people were gathering now, drawn by the unusual commotion in a space that typically ran with clockwork precision. I could hear whispered conversations, fragments of speculation about what was happening and who I was. Some faces showed curiosity, others concern, and a few displayed the kind of uncomfortable recognition that comes when people realize they might be witnessing something they'd rather not acknowledge. Patricia seemed to sense my growing discomfort. "Colonel Rivera," she said quietly, "would you like to sit down? I can get you some water." "I'm fine," I said automatically, though I wasn't sure that was true. My hands were trembling slightly, and I could feel the familiar tightness in my chest that sometimes accompanied unexpected confrontations. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd led convoys through hostile territory without breaking a sweat, but standing in a country club foyer while people debated my right to exist there was making my pulse race. "Rosa?" I turned at the sound of my name to see Marcus pushing through the crowd, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. He was wearing a golf outfit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Navy slacks, crisp white polo, leather shoes that gleamed under the chandelier lights. He looked like he belonged here in a way I never would, and seeing him in this context made the distance between our lives feel even more pronounced. "Marcus," I said, relief flooding my voice. "I was just—" "What's going on?" He looked around the assembled crowd, taking in the tension crackling through the air. "Is everything okay?" "Your sister was having some difficulty with the guest check-in process," James said smoothly, stepping forward with his political smile firmly in place. "Nothing that can't be resolved quickly," Marcus frowned. "Difficulty? Rosa, you have the invitation I sent you, right?" I held up the embossed cardstock. "Right here." "Then what's the problem?" Marcus looked genuinely confused, and I could see him trying to piece together why a simple guest registration had attracted such a crowd. Patricia stepped forward again. "The problem, Mr. Rivera, is that your colleagues here decided your sister didn't meet their standards for Prestwick guests. They were in the process of turning her away when I intervened." Marcus's expression went from confused to dangerous in the span of a heartbeat. I'd seen that look before, usually when someone questioned his work or his judgment. It was the expression of a man who'd fought for everything he'd achieved and wasn't about to let anyone diminish it. "Turning her away?" His voice was quietly lethal. "On what grounds?" "There was a question about advance notice," Bradley said, but he was looking increasingly desperate. "Guest list protocols." "What guest list protocols?" Marcus's voice rose slightly. "I'm a member. This is my sister. I invited her to a member event using the invitation the club sent to my home. What other protocol could there possibly be?" "Perhaps we should move this conversation somewhere more private," Richard suggested again, clearly uncomfortable with the growing audience. "No," Marcus said firmly. "If there's a problem with my guest, I want to know about it right here, right now. I want to understand exactly what standards my sister failed to meet." The crowd around us had grown larger, and I could see other staff members stopping their work to watch the confrontation unfold. Near the dining room entrance, I spotted several men in golf attire who looked like they might be tournament participants, their conversations forgotten as they tried to figure out what was happening. William Ashford cleared his throat. "Mr. Rivera, perhaps I can clarify the situation. There seems to have been a misunderstanding about your sister's background. The staff wasn't aware that she's a decorated military veteran." Marcus looked sharply at me, surprise written across his face. "You told them about your service?" "I didn't tell them anything," I said quietly. "Patricia knew, Dad. She remembered." Understanding dawned in Marcus's eyes. He knew how carefully I'd kept my military background private since coming home, how I'd struggled with the transition back to civilian life, how I'd deliberately avoided situations where my service might become a topic of conversation. The fact that it had been exposed here, in this context in front of all these people, was probably the last thing I would have wanted. But something else was happening in his expression too. Pride, maybe, or recognition of something he'd always known but never fully acknowledged. Marcus had achieved everything he'd dreamed of through intelligence and hard work and determination. But I'd served my country in ways he never had, sacrificed in ways he couldn't fully understand, earned respect through different means entirely. Colonel Rosa Rivera, Patricia announced to the crowd, her voice carrying clearly through the foyer. 2 tours in Afghanistan, multiple commendations for valor under fire. One of the youngest women ever to achieve field commission in the National Guard. A murmur ran through the assembled group. Several people straightened unconsciously, the kind of automatic response that military bearing tends to evoke even in civilian settings. I saw a few guests exchange glances, their expressions shifting as they processed this new information about the woman who'd been standing there in apparent distress just minutes earlier. "My sister doesn't like to talk about her service," Marcus said, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of steel. "She came home and tried to build a quiet civilian life. She works hard, pays her taxes, and minds her own business. She's never asked for special treatment or recognition. All she wanted was to attend a family celebration at her brother's country club." He turned to face Bradley, Richard, and James directly. "So I'm going to ask one more time. What exactly was the problem with my guest?" The 3 men stood frozen, trapped by their own actions and the growing scrutiny of the crowd. I could see them calculating, trying to find a way out of the corner they'd painted themselves into. They couldn't admit what had really motivated their obstruction without revealing their own prejudices, but they also couldn't maintain their position now that the full context had been exposed. "There was no problem," James said finally, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "Just a procedural question that's been resolved. Ms. Rivera, Colonel Rivera, is of course welcome at today's tournament." Just like that, Marcus wasn't letting them off the hook. "One minute you're turning my sister away, the next minute everything's fine? What changed?" "Nothing changed," Bradley insisted. "We were simply clarifying the guest list procedures." "What you were doing," said a new voice from the edge of the crowd, "was making assumptions about someone based on their appearance." The speaker was a man probably in his 40s, wearing golf attire, but with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. His name tag read David Chen, member. Something about his posture and the way he carried himself suggested military background, and when he stepped forward, several people moved aside to let him pass. "Colonel Chen, Army Rangers, retired," he said, extending his hand to me. "Served in Afghanistan 2012 to 2015. Thank you for your service." I shook his hand, grateful for the solidarity but also increasingly uncomfortable with the attention. "Thank you for yours." David turned to address the crowd that had gathered. "I've been a member here for 5 years," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to briefing rooms and command decisions. "I've seen guests who were loud, rude, intoxicated, inappropriately dressed, and disrespectful to staff. I've never once seen them questioned at the door or asked to leave, but this decorated veteran gets interrogated because she doesn't look like what these gentlemen expected a Prestwick guest to look like." More murmurs rippled through the crowd. I could see some people nodding in agreement, others looking uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. The carefully maintained facade of polite exclusivity was cracking, revealing the ugly assumptions that lay beneath. "That's not what happened," Richard protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then what did happen?" David asked pointedly. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you profiled a veteran based on your own prejudices and nearly caused an international incident in the process." "International incident?" Bradley scoffed. "I think that's a bit dramatic." "Is it?" David's smile was sharp. "Because Colonel Rivera here didn't serve in some cushy administrative role. She led supply convoys through some of the most dangerous territory in Afghanistan. She's probably got contacts throughout the military, the intelligence community, and the veteran advocacy networks. How do you think it's going to look when word gets out that Prestwick Country Club tried to bar a decorated war hero from a family celebration?" I could see the blood draining from James Whitfield's face as he began to grasp the potential ramifications. Country clubs like Prestwick survived on reputation and discretion. Bad publicity, especially involving discrimination against veterans, could be devastating. "Now I think we're all getting a bit carried away," William Ashford said diplomatically, stepping forward in what seemed like an attempt to de-escalate the situation. "This has clearly been a misunderstanding. Colonel Rivera is welcome here, always has been, always will be. Perhaps we can all move past this and enjoy the tournament." But Marcus wasn't ready to let it go. "A misunderstanding?" He looked around at the assembled crowd. My sister stood here for 15 minutes while 3 staff members tried to convince her she didn't belong. They questioned her invitation, suggested she might be more comfortable elsewhere, and made her feel unwelcome in what's supposed to be my home club. You want to call that a misunderstanding? I touched his arm gently. Marcus, it's okay. Let's just... No, Rosa, it's not okay. He turned to face me, his expression intense. You've spent your whole life making excuses for other people's behavior. You came home from 2 combat tours and acted like you should be grateful for minimum wage jobs and tiny apartments and people treating you like you're invisible. But you earned better than that. You deserve better than that. His words hit me harder than I expected. It was true. I had spent the years since my discharge trying to minimize myself, to avoid attention, to slip quietly into civilian life without making waves. Part of it was the difficulty of transitioning from military structure to civilian chaos. Part of it was survivor's guilt over friends who hadn't made it home. And part of it, if I was honest, was the exhaustion of constantly having to prove that I belonged in spaces where my presence was questioned. Your sister is absolutely right to be upset, said another voice from the crowd. This came from an older woman wearing an elegant but understated dress, her gray hair styled in a classic bob. Her name tag identified her as Margaret Thornton, member. Excuse me? Richard looked startled by this new intervention. I said Colonel Rivera has every right to be upset, Margaret repeated, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard and heeded. I've been a member of this club for 32 years. I've served on the membership committee, the social committee, and the board of directors. And in all that time, I have never seen staff question a member's guest the way you questioned this young woman. She stepped closer to the registration table, her gaze moving from Bradley to Richard to James. I've seen senators' children show up drunk to formal dinners. I've seen CEOs' wives cause scenes in the dining room. I've seen ambassadors' sons damage property and assault staff members. And not once, did I see any of them challenged at the door. The foyer had gone completely silent. Margaret Thornton was clearly someone whose opinions carried weight at Prestwick, and her words were landing like hammer blows. But this woman, Margaret continued, gesturing toward me, shows up appropriately dressed, with a legitimate invitation, behaving with perfect courtesy, and you decide she needs to be interrogated? You decide she doesn't meet your standards? Mrs. Thornton, James began, I assure you that was never our intent. Your intent is irrelevant, Margaret cut him off. Your actions speak for themselves, and your actions today have been a disgrace to everything this club claims to represent. I could feel tears building behind my eyes, a mixture of gratitude for the unexpected support and overwhelming embarrassment at being the center of such a public confrontation. This wasn't how I'd imagined Marcus's celebration going. This wasn't the quiet family moment I'd hoped to share with him. But something else was happening too. Looking around at the faces in the crowd, I could see something I hadn't expected. Respect, recognition. The kind of acknowledgement I'd stopped looking for years ago, when I realized that civilian life didn't come with the clear hierarchies and mutual respect that had defined my military service. Patricia had moved to stand beside me again, her presence steadying in a way that reminded me of the few good commanding officers I'd served under. Colonel Rivera, she said quietly, your father would be so proud of you right now. Proud of what? I asked, confused. I haven't done anything. You've stood your ground, she said simply. You didn't back down when they tried to intimidate you. You didn't apologize for being here when you had every right to be here. You let the truth speak for itself. Marcus was nodding. Dad always said the hardest battles aren't fought with weapons. They're fought with dignity and truth and the refusal to let other people define your worth. Carlos was a wise man, William Ashford said, and there was genuine warmth in his voice. I remember him from the Brookside Project. Brilliant mind for course design, and one of the most principled people I've ever worked with. If he raised a daughter with half his character, then Prestwick is honored to have her as a guest. The crowd began to disperse slowly, people drifting back toward their conversations and their tables with frequent glances back in our direction. The crisis was passing, but I could feel that something fundamental had shifted. The carefully maintained veneer of polite exclusivity had been cracked, revealing both the ugly prejudices that lay beneath and the possibility that some members genuinely wanted something better. Bradley, Richard, and James stood uncertainly near the registration table, clearly unsure how to proceed. Their authority had been publicly challenged and found wanting, but they still had jobs to do and a tournament to manage. "Gentlemen," William Ashford said, addressing them directly, "I think this would be an excellent time to review our guest policies. Make sure they're clear, consistent, and applied fairly to everyone." "Of course, Mr. Ashford," James said quickly. "We'll schedule a full review of all protocols." "See that you do." William turned to me with a kind smile. "Colonel Rivera, I hope you'll accept my personal apology for this unfortunate incident. You are most welcome at Prestwick, today and always." "Thank you," I managed, still processing everything that had happened. Marcus put his arm around my shoulders. "Come on, Rosa. Let me show you around the club. We've got a few hours before the tournament starts, and I want you to meet some people." As we walked away from the registration table, I could hear Patricia behind us, speaking quietly to the 3 staff members. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone suggested that there would be further conversations about what had transpired and how to prevent it from happening again. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked as we entered the main dining room. I looked around at the elegant space, the crystal chandeliers, the oil paintings, the views of the perfectly maintained golf course stretching toward the lake. It was beautiful, exclusive, expensive. Everything Marcus had dreamed of since we were children. "I'm okay," I said and realized I meant it. "But Marcus, are you sure this is where you want to be? After what just happened?" He was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Honestly, 5 years ago I would have said yes, without hesitation. This place represented everything I thought I wanted: success, status, acceptance, into a world that had always seemed out of reach. And now? Now I'm thinking about what Dad would say if he could see what happened back there. About how he'd feel knowing that his daughter was treated that way in a place I chose to join." We found a table near the windows and sat down, the afternoon sun streaming across the white linen and gleaming silverware. Despite everything that had happened, the setting was undeniably beautiful. "Dad would have been proud of how you handled yourself," Marcus said. "You didn't compromise who you are to make them comfortable. You didn't apologize for existing, and when the truth came out, you let it speak for itself. I didn't really have a choice. Patricia knew Dad, knew about my service. She's the one who spoke up. She spoke up because she saw something worth defending. Because Dad taught her to recognize character when she saw it, just like he taught us." A server approached our table, a young man with nervous energy who'd clearly heard about the incident in the foyer. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice carefully respectful. "Can I get you anything to drink?" "Coffee, please," I said. "Black." "Same for me," Marcus added. The server hurried away, and Marcus leaned back in his chair. "You know, Rosa, I've been working toward membership here for 5 years. I thought joining Prestwick would prove that I'd made it, that I belonged in the same spaces as the people I'd always looked up to. And now? Now I'm wondering if I want to belong in a space that would treat my sister the way they treated you. If this is the kind of place where people like Bradley Morrison get to decide who's worthy of basic respect." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Marcus, you earned this. You worked harder than anyone I know to get here. Don't let what happened today take that away from you." "But what if earning it isn't enough? What if being here means accepting that some people will always see us as outsiders, no matter what we achieve?" It was a question I'd wrestled with throughout my military service and in the years since. The exhaustion of constantly proving yourself, of knowing that some people would always see your presence as a favor rather than a right, of having to be twice as good to get half the recognition. "I don't have an answer to that," I said honestly. "But I know that walking away won't change anything. The only way things get better is if people like us stay, speak up, and refuse to let others define what we're worth." The server returned with our coffee, setting the cups down with unusual care. "Excuse me," he said quietly, "but I wanted to thank you for your service, Colonel Rivera. My brother's deployed in Kuwait right now." "Thank you," I said, touched by the gesture. "I hope he stays safe." After the server left, Marcus and I sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, sipping our coffee and watching golfers on the course beyond the windows. The afternoon light was starting to shift, casting longer shadows across the perfectly manicured fairways. "You know what I think Dad would say if he were here?" Marcus asked eventually. "What?" "He'd say that the real test isn't whether places like this accept us. It's whether we can change them for the better just by being ourselves." I smiled, hearing our father's voice in Marcus's words. Carlos Rivera had never preached about social justice or systemic change. He'd simply lived his values every day, treating everyone with dignity, working with integrity, and raising his children to believe they deserved the same opportunities as anyone else. He'd also probably say we're overthinking it, I added, and that we should focus on enjoying the day instead of worrying about what other people think. Marcus laughed. True. He always did have a talent for cutting through the complicated stuff to get to what really mattered. The tournament was scheduled to begin in an hour, and already we could see participants gathering on the first tee, checking their equipment and warming up their swings. The incident in the foyer was becoming a memory, something that had happened but didn't have to define the rest of the day. But I knew it wasn't over. Word would spread through the club about what had occurred, and people would form opinions about the confrontation, about Marcus, about me. Some would see it as an unfortunate misunderstanding that had been resolved. Others would recognize it for what it really was, a moment when the club's carefully maintained facade had slipped, revealing both its flaws and its potential for something better. As we finished our coffee and prepared to join the tournament festivities, I realized that Patricia had been right about one thing. My father would have been proud, not just of how I'd handled myself, but of the fact that I'd finally stopped trying to make myself small enough to fit into other people's expectations. Whatever happened next, I was exactly where I belonged. The first tee was bustling with activity when Marcus and I made our way over from the clubhouse. Foursomes were gathering around their golf bags, checking scorecards and making last-minute adjustments to their equipment. The afternoon sun cast everything in golden light, and the perfectly maintained course stretched out before us like something from a magazine photograph. I'd never been much of a golf fan, but there was something undeniably peaceful about the setting. The gentle slope of the fairways, the strategic placement of sand traps and water hazards, the way the trees framed each hole like a natural gallery. I could understand why my father had found satisfaction in maintaining courses like this, in creating something beautiful that brought people joy. Rosa? I turned to see David Chen approaching with his golf bag slung over his shoulder. He was accompanied by two other men, both wearing the kind of expensive golf attire that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "David," I said, still getting used to the informal use of his first name after our formal introduction in the foyer. "I'd like you to meet my regular foursome," he said. "This is Dr. Michael Patterson, Chief of Surgery at Millbrook General." A distinguished man with silver temples stepped forward to shake my hand. "And this is Professor James Liu from the university's engineering department." Both men greeted me with genuine warmth, and I could tell that David had filled them in on what had happened earlier. There was none of the awkward sizing up that I'd grown accustomed to in social situations. No subtle questions designed to figure out where I fit in their world. "David tells us you served in Afghanistan," Dr. Patterson said. "My son just finished his deployment with the Air Force. I have tremendous respect for what you and others like you have sacrificed for our country." "Thank you," I replied, meaning it. "I hope your son's transition home goes smoothly." "It has, thanks largely to the veteran support programs here in Millbrook. Have you connected with any of the local veteran organizations?" The question caught me off guard. In the 3 years since my discharge, I'd deliberately avoided veteran groups, partly out of a desire to move forward, and partly because I wasn't sure I'd fit in. My service had been unconventional in many ways, and I'd always felt caught between worlds, not quite fitting with the combat veterans who'd seen heavier action, but having experienced things that most civilian-facing military personnel hadn't. "I haven't really looked into it," I admitted. "You should," Professor Liu said. "The Millbrook Veterans Foundation does incredible work with job placement, education benefits, mental health support. My wife volunteers with their career counseling program, and she's always talking about how much they need people with your background to mentor younger veterans." Marcus had been listening to this conversation with an expression I couldn't quite read. When there was a natural pause, he spoke up. "Rosa's been working in customer service since she came home. It's good, steady work, but I've always thought she was capable of much more." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. This was exactly the kind of attention I'd been trying to avoid. the spotlight on my civilian struggles that inevitably led to questions about why someone with my military background was working a job that didn't require a college degree. "Customer service is honorable work," David said diplomatically, "but it sounds like you might be interested in exploring other options." "Maybe," I said non-committally. "I'm still figuring things out." "The transition can be challenging," Dr. Patterson agreed. "My son struggled with it too. The structure and sense of purpose that military service provides doesn't translate easily to civilian life, but there are resources available, and sometimes it just takes the right opportunity to open up new possibilities." Before I could respond, a commotion near the clubhouse caught our attention. I turned to see a small group of people emerging from the building, and my heart sank when I recognized Bradley Morrison among them. He was accompanied by several other staff members and what looked like a few club board members, including James Whitfield. "Looks like the management team is making the rounds," David observed, his tone carefully neutral. The group was moving systematically through the crowd of tournament participants, stopping to chat with various foursomes. It had the feel of damage control, an attempt to smooth over any lingering tension from the earlier incident. I watched as they approached each group with practiced smiles and what I imagined were carefully scripted explanations about the morning's misunderstanding. "Colonel Rivera?" I turned to find William Ashford approaching, but he wasn't part of the management group making rounds. He was alone, carrying a golf bag and wearing the comfortable attire of someone preparing to play rather than manage a crisis. "Mr. Ashford," I said, straightening slightly. "I was hoping I might have a word with you," he said, glancing around at David, Dr. Patterson, and Professor Liu. "Privately, if you don't mind." Marcus stepped closer to me, a protective gesture that I appreciated, even though I didn't think it was necessary. William Ashford didn't feel like a threat, but given the morning's events, I understood my brother's caution. "It's all right," I told Marcus. "I'll catch up with you in a few minutes." William led me a short distance away from the crowd, to a quieter area near the practice green. When we were out of earshot of the other golfers, he turned to face me directly. "Colonel Rivera, I owe you more than just an apology," he said, his voice serious. "What happened this morning was unacceptable, and as a member of this club's board of directors, I take full responsibility for allowing a culture to exist where such treatment was possible. I wasn't sure how to respond. In my experience, people in positions of authority rarely took responsibility for systemic problems, preferring instead to treat isolated incidents as the actions of rogue individuals rather than symptoms of larger issues. I appreciate that, Mr. Ashford, but please let me finish," he said gently. "I've been a member of this club for over 40 years. I watched it evolve from a small local golf course to the prestigious institution it is today. And somewhere along the way, I allowed myself to become comfortable with the idea that prestige required exclusivity, that excellence meant keeping certain people out, rather than inviting the right people in." He paused, looking out across the golf course toward the lake in the distance. "Your father helped design the water management system that saved this course during the drought 5 years ago. He consulted on the project as a volunteer, refused any payment, and spent months of his retirement working to preserve something that brought joy to others. That's the kind of character this club should be seeking to attract, not exclude." "My father never mentioned working here," I said quietly. "He was very humble about it, called it just helping out some golfers. But his work quite literally saved Prestwick. Without his expertise, we would have lost half our greens and probably faced bankruptcy." William's expression grew sad. "I should have done more to honor his contribution while he was alive. The least I can do now is ensure his daughter receives the respect she deserves." The weight of this revelation settled over me slowly. My father had helped save the very club where I'd been questioned and nearly turned away. There was a bitter irony in it, but also something that felt like completion, a circle being closed in a way I never could have anticipated. "What happened this morning has been a wake-up call for me and for several board members," William continued. "We've scheduled an emergency meeting for next week to review our policies, our staff training, and our club culture. I'd like to invite you to attend that meeting if you're willing." "Me?" The suggestion caught me completely off guard. "Mr. Ashford, I'm not even a member." "I don't think—" "You're exactly the perspective we need," he said firmly. "Someone who's experienced both the best and worst of what this club has to offer. Someone who understands service and sacrifice, and what it means to earn respect through character rather than just financial capability." I looked back toward the tournament area, where Marcus was chatting with his playing partners and other members were going through their pre-round routines. It all looked so normal, so civilized, so far removed from the tension and confrontation of the morning. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "That's all I can ask." William smiled, and for the first time since I'd met him, it felt completely genuine. "Now, I believe your brother is scheduled to tee off in the next group. You won't want to miss his first tournament round as a Prestwick member." We walked back toward the first tee, where Marcus was indeed preparing for his round. He was paired with 3 other golfers I didn't recognize, all of them looking relaxed and confident in the way that came from years of playing together. "Rosa," Marcus called out when he saw me approaching. "Come meet my playing partners." The introductions were warm and genuine, and I could tell that word of the morning's events had spread, but in a way that seemed to work in my favor rather than against me. These men treated me with a kind of respectful curiosity, asking thoughtful questions about my service without prying into details I might not want to share. "Your brother's been looking forward to this tournament for months," one of them said. "We've been playing practice rounds together, and I have to say, he's got a game that's going to surprise some people." Marcus beamed with pride, and I realized how much this moment meant to him. This wasn't just about golf or social status or proving he belonged in exclusive spaces. This was about achieving a dream he'd carried since childhood, about honoring our father's memory by reaching heights our family had never imagined possible. The first tee area grew quiet as Marcus stepped up to address his ball. The pressure of the moment was obvious. His first shot as a Prestwick member, in front of a crowd that included people who'd witnessed the morning's confrontation, with his sister watching from the gallery. Marcus took his time setting up, going through the pre-shot routine I'd watched him practice countless times in public parks and municipal courses over the years. His stance was confident, his grip relaxed, his focus complete. When he finally swung, the ball launched in a perfect arc down the center of the fairway, drawing appreciative murmurs from the watching crowd. "Beautiful shot," David Chen called out, and several other spectators nodded in agreement. Marcus's playing partners congratulated him, and I could see the relief and joy on his face as he gathered his tee and stepped back to let the next player take his turn. He caught my eye and gave me a subtle thumbs up, a gesture that took me back to Little League games and school presentations and all the moments throughout our lives when we'd been each other's primary source of support and encouragement. As the foursome made their way down to their balls, I found myself falling into step with a group of other family members and friends who were following the tournament. It felt natural in a way I hadn't expected, this casual joining of a community I'd felt so excluded from just hours earlier. "You must be very proud of your brother," said a woman walking beside me. She looked to be in her 50s, with the kind of understated elegance that suggested genuine class rather than performative wealth. "I am," I replied. "He's worked incredibly hard to get here." "I'm Sarah Worthington," she said, extending her hand. "My husband Robert is playing in the group behind Marcus. We've heard wonderful things about your brother from the other members." The name Worthington rang a bell from my week of research about Prestwick's membership. Old money, pharmaceutical fortune, one of the families that had helped establish the club in the 1950s. Exactly the kind of people I'd imagined looking down on newcomers like Marcus and me. "It's nice to meet you," I said, waiting for the inevitable awkwardness that came when conversations moved beyond surface pleasantries. But Sarah seemed genuinely interested in talking, asking questions about Marcus's background and career without any of the subtle probing I'd learned to expect from people trying to figure out whether we belonged in their social circle. "Robert and I have been members here for 25 years, she said as we walked along the cart path. "We've seen the club evolve quite a bit during that time. Some changes for the better, some not so much." "What kind of changes?" I asked, curious about her perspective. "Well, the facilities have certainly improved. The course is in better condition than it's ever been. The dining is excellent. The social programming is quite sophisticated." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "But sometimes I worry that we've become so focused on exclusivity and prestige that we've lost sight of what a club should really be about." "Which is?" "Community," she said simply. "A place where people with shared interests can come together, support each other, build lasting friendships. When everything becomes about status and gatekeeping, you lose the human element that makes membership worthwhile." We crested a small hill and could see Marcus's group preparing for their second shots. He was in good position, his ball sitting in the middle of the fairway about 150 yards from the green. The other spectators spread out along the rope line, creating a small gallery for the players. "I heard about what happened this morning," Sarah said quietly, watching as Marcus selected a club from his bag. "I want you to know that not all of us share the attitudes that were displayed by the staff." "I appreciate that," I said, genuinely moved by her directness. "My father was a Marine in World War II," she continued. "He used to say that you could tell everything you needed to know about a person's character by how they treated people who couldn't do anything for them. What happened to you this morning was a failure of character. Not just by the individuals involved, but by an institution that allowed such attitudes to flourish." Marcus's second shot was another beauty, landing on the green about 15 feet from the pin. The small crowd applauded appreciatively, and I felt a surge of pride watching my brother play with such skill and confidence. "He's quite good," Sarah observed. "He's been practicing for years, dreaming of playing on a course like this." I watched as Marcus marked his ball and stepped aside to let his playing partners hit their approach shots. Our father used to take us to watch tournaments at the municipal course when we were kids. Marcus would study every shot, asking questions about strategy and technique. Dad always said Marcus had the mind for golf, even if we couldn't afford the lessons and equipment back then. "And what about you? Do you play?" I laughed. "Not well. I tried to learn when I was younger, but I never had the patience for it. Military training taught me to value efficiency and direct action. Golf requires a different kind of mindset. Different skills, but similar discipline," Sarah said thoughtfully. "Both require mental toughness, the ability to bounce back from mistakes, strategic thinking under pressure." As we continued following the group, I found myself relaxing into the conversation in a way that surprised me. Sarah asked about my military service, but her questions came from genuine curiosity, rather than the awkward obligation I often sensed in civilian interactions. She seemed particularly interested in the leadership challenges I'd faced, drawing parallels to her own experiences running a nonprofit foundation. "I serve on the board of the Millbrook Women's Leadership Initiative," she told me as we watched the players line up their putts on the third green. "We provide mentorship and professional development opportunities for women in various fields. We've had several programs focused on supporting female veterans, but we've always felt like we were missing some authentic perspective from people who've actually lived that experience." "What kind of programs?" I asked, intrigued despite myself. "Career counseling, networking events, skills translation workshops, helping veterans understand how their military experience applies to civilian careers. But it's been challenging because most of our board members, myself included, don't have military backgrounds. We're operating from good intentions but limited understanding." Marcus sank his putt for birdie, his first of the tournament, and the small gallery erupted in applause. I cheered loudly, probably more loudly than was appropriate for the genteel atmosphere of a country club tournament, but I didn't care. This was my brother achieving something he'd dreamed about since childhood. "You should be proud," Sarah said, smiling at my obvious joy. "And not just of his golf game. The way he's handled himself today, both on the course and in dealing with this morning's incident, shows real character." "He's always been like that," I said. "Focused, determined, never letting obstacles derail him from his goals." "Those are leadership qualities," Sarah observed. "The kind of traits our leadership initiative tries to develop in the women we work with." "I wonder." She paused, seeming to consider something. "Would you be interested in speaking to one of our groups sometime, sharing your perspective on leadership, transition challenges, building resilience?" The invitation caught me off guard. I don't really think of myself as a leadership expert. "But you are," Sarah said firmly. "You led convoys through hostile territory. You made life and death decisions under extreme pressure. You've successfully transitioned from military to civilian life while maintaining your integrity and values. Those are exactly the kinds of experiences our participants need to hear about." As we moved to the next tee, I found myself considering the possibility. For years, I'd thought of my military service as something that belonged in the past, a chapter of my life that didn't necessarily inform my civilian future. But maybe that was wrong. Maybe the experiences and skills I'd developed in the Army were assets I could use to help others, rather than liabilities I needed to overcome. The tournament continued through the afternoon, and I was amazed by how my perception of the day evolved. What had started as an ordeal, being questioned, challenged, and made to feel unwelcome, had transformed into something unexpectedly positive. People sought me out for conversation, included me in their groups, treated me not as Marcus's guest who needed to be tolerated, but as an individual worthy of respect and interest. Dr. Patterson introduced me to several other medical professionals who were working with veteran health initiatives. Professor Liu connected me with colleagues who were researching veteran employment outcomes. David Chen invited me to a monthly networking dinner from military professionals in the area. By the time we reached the 18th tee, I realized that I'd received more genuine professional interest and networking opportunities in one afternoon at Prestwick than I'd encountered in 3 years of civilian job searching. Marcus's final hole was a challenging par 4 with water running along the left side of the fairway. He'd played consistently well throughout the round, currently sitting at 3 under par and in contention for one of the top amateur spots in the tournament. "No pressure," I called out as he prepared to tee off, earning a grin and a mock glare from my brother. His drive was solid if not spectacular, finding the right side of the fairway and leaving him with a manageable approach shot to the green. As we walked down the 18th fairway, I reflected on how much had changed since we'd walked through the clubhouse doors that morning. "Quite a day," said a voice behind me. I turned to see Patricia Hendricks approaching, no longer in her work attire but dressed casually for watching the tournament. "Patricia," I said warmly, "thank you again for what you did today." "I didn't do anything but tell the truth," she said simply. "Your father was a good man who raised good children." That should have been obvious to anyone paying attention. We watched as Marcus hit his approach shot to within 10 feet of the pin, setting up a potential birdie putt to finish his round. "You know," Patricia said thoughtfully, "this club has been needing change for a long time. Not change to the golf course or the facilities, but change to the culture, the values, the way we treat people. What happened today might be the catalyst we've been waiting for." "How so?" "Word spreads fast in a place like this. By tomorrow, every member will know the story of what happened in the foyer, how it was resolved, and what it revealed about some of our institutional practices. That kind of public accountability has a way of forcing introspection and reform." Marcus lined up his birdie putt carefully, reading the break from multiple angles. The small gallery around the green had grown as word spread about his strong round and the dramatic events surrounding his family's presence at the tournament. "This putt's for a 68, one of his playing partners announced to the crowd. That would put him in second place in the member division." The gallery went quiet as Marcus settled over his putt. I held my breath, knowing how much this moment meant to him, how much this entire day represented the culmination of years of work and sacrifice and dreaming. The ball rolled smoothly across the green, holding its line perfectly, and dropped into the cup with a satisfying sound. The crowd erupted in applause, and Marcus raised his putter above his head in celebration before breaking into the biggest smile I'd seen from him in years. "That's my brother," I shouted, not caring about country club decorum or appropriate spectator behavior. This was a moment for pure joy, for celebrating achievement and family, and the realization of long-held dreams. Marcus made his way through the congratulations from his playing partners and other spectators, but his eyes were searching for me. When he found me in the crowd, he broke away from the group and wrapped me in a hug that lifted me off my feet. "We did it, Rosa," he whispered in my ear. "We actually did it." "You did it," I corrected him. "You earned this. All of it." "No," he said, setting me down but keeping his hands on my shoulders. "We did it together. Dad's kids made it to Prestwick Country Club, and we didn't compromise who we are to get here." The awards ceremony took place on the clubhouse terrace as the sun began to set over the lake. Marcus finished second in the member division, earning a crystal trophy and recognition as one of the tournament's standout performers. When his name was called, the applause was genuine and warm, and I could see that he'd earned not just tolerance but actual respect from his fellow members. During the cocktail reception that followed, I found myself in conversation after conversation with people who seemed genuinely interested in my background, my perspectives, and my plans for the future. The contrast with my usual social experiences was so stark that it almost felt surreal. "Colonel Rivera?" I turned to see James Whitfield approaching, but his demeanor was completely different from our encounter that morning. Gone was the political smile and condescending tone, replaced by what appeared to be genuine humility. "Mr. Whitfield," I said neutrally. "I wanted to apologize personally for what happened this morning," he said without preamble. "There's no excuse for how you were treated, and I take full responsibility for creating an environment where such behavior was possible." I studied his face, looking for signs of the calculated damage control I'd expected, but he seemed genuinely affected by the day's events, genuinely remorseful about his role in them. "I appreciate that," I said carefully. "I've been president of this club for 3 years," he continued. "I thought I was focused on maintaining standards, preserving traditions, ensuring that Prestwick remained a place of excellence, but today made me realize that somewhere along the way I'd confused exclusivity with excellence, tradition with prejudice." He paused, looking out over the terrace where members were mingling and celebrating the tournament results. "Your father's work saved this club," he said quietly. "When we were facing the drought and potential bankruptcy, Carlos Rivera spent months of his retirement volunteering his expertise to design a water management system that preserved our greens and our future. He never asked for recognition, never sought membership or special treatment. He just helped because it was the right thing to do." I felt tears building behind my eyes as I listened to yet another story about my father's quiet generosity, his commitment to helping others regardless of whether they appreciated or even acknowledged his contributions. The irony of his daughter being questioned and nearly turned away from a celebration at the club he helped save. James shook his head. "It's forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about the culture I've been perpetuating here." "What are you going to do about it?" I asked directly. "Everything I can," he said with conviction, "starting with a complete review of our policies and training programs. But going much deeper than that, we need to examine our values, our practices, our definition of what makes someone worthy of respect and inclusion." Marcus appeared at my side, still glowing from his tournament success and the warm reception he'd received from other members. "James was just apologizing for this morning," I told him. "I was also telling your sister about the board meeting next week," James said. "We'd be honored if both of you would attend. Your perspectives on how we can do better, how we can become the kind of club that truly reflects our stated values of character and excellence." Marcus looked at me questioningly. "What do you think?" I looked around the terrace, taking in the scene of members and guests enjoying the evening, celebrating golf and friendship and achievement. Despite everything that had happened, despite the morning's ugliness and confrontation, there was something appealing about the possibility of being part of positive change, rather than simply walking away from a flawed institution. "I think Dad would want us to try," I said finally. The reception continued into the evening, with dinner served on the terrace under strings of lights that transformed the space into something magical. I found myself seated at a table with Sarah Worthington, Dr. Patterson, David Chen, and several other members who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me better. The conversation ranged from military experiences to career transitions, to local politics, to favorite books and travel destinations. It was the kind of wide-ranging, intellectually stimulating discussion I'd missed more than I'd realized during my years of working jobs that didn't challenge me mentally. "You know," Sarah said as we finished dessert, "I wasn't joking earlier about speaking to our leadership initiative groups. We have a session next month focused on navigating career transitions, and your perspective would be invaluable." "I'm not sure I have much wisdom to offer," I said honestly. "My own transition hasn't exactly been smooth." "That's exactly why your perspective would be valuable," Dr. Patterson interjected. "The women in these programs don't need to hear from people who had easy paths to success. They need to hear from someone who's faced real challenges and found ways to persevere." "Think about it," Sarah added. "And if you're interested, we pay speaking fees that are quite competitive. It might be a way to supplement your current income while exploring whether you'd like to do more work in the veteran advocacy space." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Marcus and I found ourselves sitting alone on the terrace, watching the lights reflect off the lake and processing everything that had happened. "So," Marcus said eventually, "how do you feel about all this?" "Honestly, I'm not sure," I admitted. "This morning I was ready to leave and never come back. Tonight I'm considering joining committees and speaking at events and basically becoming a regular part of this community. Is that a bad thing?" I thought about the question seriously. "I don't know. Part of me wonders if I'm being co-opted, if accepting their apologies and invitations is just letting them off the hook for how they treated me initially. Or, Marcus suggested, maybe you're in a position to influence positive change from the inside. Maybe walking away would just leave things exactly as they were for the next person who doesn't fit their preconceptions. When did you get so wise? I asked, smiling at my little brother. I learned from watching my big sister, he said simply. You've been fighting for what's right your whole life, even when it was harder than just going along with the status quo. This might just be a different kind of battlefield. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us reflecting on the unexpected turns the day had taken. Finally, Marcus spoke again. You know what the best part of today was? You're 68? The trophy? The fact that you're probably going to be featured in the club newsletter? No, he said, grinning. The best part was watching my sister remember who she really is. For the first time since you came home, I saw the officer who led convoys through Afghanistan. I saw the leader who earned field commission through courage and competence. I saw the woman Dad raised to never back down from bullies, whether they're wearing enemy uniforms or country club polo shirts. Tears ran down my cheeks as I processed his words. He was right. Something had shifted in me during the confrontation and its aftermath. For years I'd been trying to make myself smaller, less visible, less challenging to the civilian world I was trying to navigate. But today had reminded me that there was strength in standing my ground, value in speaking my truth, and power in refusing to let others define my worth. Thank you, I said quietly. For what? For bringing me here. For fighting for me when I was too tired to fight for myself. For never giving up on the idea that we belonged in places like this. Marcus reached over and took my hand. We're Rivera kids, he said, echoing something our father used to tell us when we faced challenges. We don't quit, we don't back down. And we don't let anyone tell us we can't achieve our dreams. As we finally prepared to leave, Patricia appeared one last time, carrying a small wrapped package. I wanted to give you this before you go, she said, handing me the package. It belonged to your father. He left it behind after working on the water management project, and I always meant to return it but never had the chance. I unwrapped the package carefully to find my father's old measuring tape, worn smooth from years of use and marked with his initials. It was such a simple thing, but it represented everything he'd been: practical, hardworking, always ready to help solve problems and build something better. He used this every day for 20 years, I said, running my fingers over the familiar tool. He used it here too, Patricia said, softly. Spent hours measuring and remeasuring to make sure the irrigation system would be perfectly placed. He said precision in the small things was what made the big things possible. I looked up at the clubhouse, with its elegant facade and carefully maintained grounds, knowing now that my father's work had played a role in preserving all of it. There was something deeply satisfying about that knowledge, about the idea that Carlos Rivera's legacy lived on in this place that had initially tried to exclude his daughter. Thank you, I told Patricia, for everything. Thank your father, she replied. He taught me that the measure of a person isn't where they come from or how much money they have. It's what they do when nobody's watching, how they treat people who can't help them, and whether they leave things better than they found them. As Marcus and I walked to our cars, I realized that the day had given me something I hadn't expected to find, a sense of purpose and possibility that had been missing since my discharge. The speaking opportunities, the committee invitations, the networking connections, they all pointed toward a future where my military experience could be an asset rather than something to overcome. So, Marcus said as we reached our cars, I'll see you at the board meeting next week? Yeah, I said, surprised by my own certainty. Yeah, you will. And the leadership initiative, speaking engagement? I'm thinking about it. Good, he said, unlocking his car. Because Dad would be proud of both of us today. You for standing your ground, and me for finally learning to use a 7-iron properly. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. Drive safe, tournament champion. You too, Colonel Rivera. As I drove home through the quiet streets of Millbrook, I thought about the unexpected ways life could change direction. That morning, I'd been dreading a social obligation at my brother's exclusive club. Tonight, I was considering opportunities to use my voice and experience to help others, while potentially finding a community where my background was valued rather than questioned. The measuring tape sat on my passenger seat, a tangible reminder of my father's legacy and the values he'd instilled in both of his children. Precision in the small things making the big things possible. Perhaps that's what today had been about. Small acts of courage and honesty, adding up to something larger, something that could change not just my own trajectory, but maybe help others find their way as well. Tomorrow, I would call Sarah Worthington about the speaking engagement. I would research the veteran organizations that had been mentioned throughout the evening. I would start thinking about how to translate 3 years of drifting into a foundation for building something meaningful. But tonight, I would simply savor the satisfaction of a day when I'd refused to make myself small, when I'd remembered who I was beneath the civilian clothes and the minimum wage job and the careful avoidance of attention. Tonight, I was Colonel Rosa Rivera, daughter of Carlos Rivera, sister of Marcus Rivera, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like more than enough. 3 months later, I stood in the same marble foyer where I'd been questioned and nearly turned away, but everything had changed. The space looked identical, same crystal chandeliers, same oil paintings, same pristine floors, but the atmosphere was completely different. Where tension had once crackled through the air, there was now a sense of genuine warmth and inclusion that extended far beyond surface politeness. The Millbrook Women's Leadership Initiative was hosting their monthly networking breakfast at Prestwick, and I was the featured speaker. 43 women filled the private dining room, representing everyone from recent college graduates to seasoned executives, military veterans, to stay-at-home mothers re-entering the workforce. The diversity of backgrounds and experiences would have been unthinkable at a Prestwick event just a few months earlier. "Ladies," Sarah Worthington said, calling the group to attention, "I'm delighted to introduce our speaker this morning." Colonel Rosa Rivera served 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan, where she led supply convoys through hostile territory and earned multiple commendations for valor under fire. Since transitioning to civilian life, she's become a powerful advocate for veteran employment and leadership development. Please join me in welcoming Colonel Rivera. The applause was warm and sustained, but I no longer felt the familiar flutter of anxiety that had once accompanied public speaking. These women weren't here to judge whether I belonged in their world. They were here to learn from experiences that might help them navigate their own challenges and transitions. "Thank you, Sarah," I began, looking out at the faces around the room. 3 months ago, I walked into this building for the first time, and I almost didn't make it past the front door. A few people shifted in their seats, uncertain where this was heading. The story of that day had become somewhat legendary at Prestwick, though different people told different versions depending on their perspective and agenda. I was stopped, questioned, and nearly turned away by staff members who decided I didn't look like I belonged here. And you know what? They were right, in a way. I didn't belong in the version of Prestwick that existed 3 months ago, a place where assumptions about worth were based on appearance rather than character, where exclusivity was valued more than excellence. I paused, letting that sink in before continuing. But here's what I learned that day, and what I want to share with all of you. Belonging isn't something that gets handed to you by other people. It's something you claim for yourself by refusing to accept others' limitations on your potential. The room was completely quiet now, everyone leaning forward slightly in their chairs. I spent 3 years after my military discharge trying to make myself smaller, quieter, less threatening to civilian sensibilities. I took jobs that didn't challenge me, avoided situations where my background might make others uncomfortable, and basically tried to disappear into a version of normal that was never going to fit who I really was. Dr. Patricia Hayes, the new Director of Veteran Services at Millbrook General, nodded knowingly from her seat near the front. She was one of several women in the room who'd reached out to me after that first speaking engagement, looking for ways to better serve the veteran community. "The confrontation that happened here wasn't pleasant," I continued, "but it forced me to stop hiding from my own story. It reminded me that leadership isn't just about what you do in official positions of authority. It's about how you show up in every moment, whether you're commanding a convoy or standing in a country club lobby." Over the past 3 months, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. The speaking engagement with Sarah's group had led to others: veteran organizations, professional associations, college career centers. Each event had built my confidence and clarified my sense of purpose. I'd discovered that my military experience, combined with the challenges of civilian transition, gave me insights that people genuinely valued. More importantly, I'd started working as a consultant with Dr. Hayes to develop better support programs for transitioning veterans. The work drew on everything I'd learned: military leadership, civilian struggle, and the hard-won understanding that effective support required meeting people where they were, rather than where you thought they should be. How many of you have ever been in a situation where someone decided you didn't belong before they even knew who you were? I asked the room. Nearly every hand went up, creating a moment of shared recognition that transcended the differences in age, background, and experience. The question isn't whether it will happen. It will. The question is how you respond when it does. Do you accept their assessment and retreat? Or do you stand your ground and force them to see who you really are? After my presentation, during the informal networking portion of the breakfast, I found myself in conversations that would have seemed impossible during my years of drift and uncertainty. A tech company executive was looking for consultants to help with their veteran hiring initiative. A nonprofit director wanted to explore partnerships between her organization and the veteran services program I was helping to develop. A small business owner was seeking advice on transitioning from corporate leadership to entrepreneurship. These weren't charity conversations or polite social gestures. They were genuine professional discussions between peers who respected each other's expertise and experience. Rosa, Sarah approached as the event began winding down. I wanted you to know that this morning's presentation was exceptional. The feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. Thank you, I said, meaning it. These events have become something I genuinely look forward to. Good, because I have a proposition for you. Sarah's expression turned more serious. The leadership initiative is expanding our programming, and we're looking for someone to develop and manage our veteran outreach efforts. It would be a part-time position initially, with the potential to grow into something full-time if the programs succeed. The offer caught me off guard, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Over the past months, Sarah and I had developed a genuine working relationship that extended well beyond the original speaking engagement. She'd become something of a mentor, helping me navigate the transition from uncertain job seeker to confident professional advocate. I'm interested, I said carefully. What would it involve? Program development, partnership building, some direct client work, and continued speaking engagements. The salary would be competitive, probably triple what you're making now, with full benefits and significant autonomy to build something meaningful. I looked around the dining room, taking in the scene of professional women networking and supporting each other's career development. Just months earlier, I'd been an outsider looking in, questioning whether I had anything valuable to contribute to conversations like this. When do you need an answer? Take your time, Sarah said, but know that you'd be starting something that could potentially help hundreds of women veterans across the region. The need is there, the funding is available, and you've proven you have both the expertise and the communication skills to make a real impact. After the breakfast ended and the other attendees had departed, I found myself walking through the clubhouse with a freedom that would have been unthinkable 3 months earlier. Patricia Hendricks had invited me to see some renovations being done to the pro shop, and I was curious about the changes that had been implemented since the board meeting. The member feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, Patricia told me as we walked through the updated facilities. The diversity training for all staff, the revised guest policies, the partnership with local veteran organizations, it's created a much more welcoming atmosphere. The board meeting had been a revelation. What I'd expected to be a perfunctory session focused on damage control had instead become a genuine examination of club culture and values. William Ashford had come prepared with research on best practices from other clubs that had successfully diversified their membership and programming. Several board members had shared their own experiences with discrimination and exclusion, creating space for honest conversation about institutional change. My role in that meeting had been to provide perspective on what inclusion actually looked like in practice, not just policies on paper, but day-to-day behaviors and attitudes that either welcomed newcomers or reinforced barriers to belonging. The staff training made the biggest difference, Patricia continued. Teaching people to examine their own assumptions, to ask better questions, to default to inclusion rather than exclusion when situations were ambiguous. We stopped at a display case that hadn't been there before, filled with photographs and artifacts representing the diverse history of golf in the region. One photo showed my father working on the irrigation system that had saved the course, identified with a small placard. Carlos Rivera, Consulting Engineer, Water Management Project 2019. I asked Marcus if we could include this, Patricia said quietly. Your father's contribution deserved recognition. I stared at the photograph, seeing my dad in his work clothes, measuring tape in hand, focused completely on the technical problem he was trying to solve. He looked younger than I remembered, more vital, engaged in work that clearly gave him satisfaction and purpose. He would have been amazed by all this, I said, gesturing around the clubhouse. Not just the recognition, but the fact that his kids ended up being part of this community. He wouldn't have been amazed, Patricia corrected gently. He would have been proud, but not amazed. Carlos always knew his children were destined for great things. He talked about it constantly during our work together. As we finished the tour and I prepared to leave, I reflected on how profoundly my relationship with this place had evolved. What had begun as an obligation, supporting Marcus at his member tournament, had become a catalyst for rediscovering my own sense of purpose and possibility. The drive home took me past the community college where I'd started and abandoned multiple degree programs over the years, past the shopping center where I'd worked retail jobs that barely covered rent, past the apartment complex where I'd spent 3 years trying to figure out what came after military service. All of those experiences suddenly felt like preparation rather than failure. Building empathy for people struggling with transition, understanding the challenges of reinventing yourself in civilian contexts, learning what it meant to feel overlooked and undervalued by institutions that claimed to welcome everyone. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, tournament champion," I said, answering with the teasing tone that had become our standard greeting. "Very funny. How did the speaking thing go this morning?" "Really well, actually. Sarah offered me a job." There was a pause. "A job? Like a real job? With benefits and everything?" "A real job," I confirmed, laughing at his excitement. "Developing veteran programs for the Leadership Initiative. It would mean leaving customer service behind and doing something that actually uses my skills and experience." "Rosa, that's incredible. Are you going to take it?" I looked at my apartment building, with its aging siding and small windows, and realized that I could probably afford something better now. Not because of the money, though that would certainly help, but because I was finally ready to stop hiding from my own potential. "Yeah," I said, surprised by my own certainty. "Yeah, I think I am." "Dad would be so proud," Marcus said quietly. "He'd probably say we're overthinking it," I replied, echoing a conversation we'd had months earlier. "And that we should focus on doing good work, instead of worrying about what other people think." After hanging up, I sat in my car for a few more minutes, processing the magnitude of the changes that had occurred since that difficult morning at Prestwick. The external transformations were significant: new job opportunities, expanded professional network, financial stability, recognition for my expertise and experience. But the internal changes were even more profound. I'd rediscovered the confidence and sense of purpose that had defined my military service. I'd learned to see my transition struggles not as personal failures, but as experiences that deepened my understanding of challenges faced by others. Most importantly, I'd remembered that belonging wasn't something I needed to earn from other people. It was something I could claim for myself by showing up authentically and refusing to accept others' limitations on my worth. The measuring tape from my father's toolkit sat on my kitchen counter where I'd placed it after that first day at Prestwick. I picked it up now, running my fingers over the worn metal and faded numbers, thinking about precision and small things making big things possible. Carlos Rivera had measured and remeasured to ensure that an irrigation system would function perfectly, preserving something beautiful for future generations to enjoy. His daughter was learning to apply the same principle to building a life: careful attention to values and choices that would create sustainable foundations for meaningful work. 3 months ago, I'd been questioned about whether I belonged at my brother's country club. Today, I was being recruited to help lead programs that would support other women veterans in claiming their own place in professional communities that might initially question their presence. The irony wasn't lost on me, but neither was the profound satisfaction of turning a moment of exclusion into a foundation for expanding inclusion for others. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah. "Board approved the position unanimously. When can you start?" I typed back, "Monday works for me." Outside my window, the sun was setting over Millbrook, casting long shadows across the landscape my father had spent decades helping to maintain and improve. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight I was content to sit with the knowledge that sometimes the most unexpected confrontations can become the catalysts for the most meaningful transformations. Carlos Rivera's daughter had finally found her way home, not to a place, but to a sense of purpose that honored both where she'd come from and where she was capable of going. The measuring tape would have a place of honor in my new office, a reminder that precision in small daily choices was indeed what made the biggest dreams possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.